The first 100 days in office are critical for new presidents to set the agenda and clarify their priorities. Joe Biden was elected on promises to swiftly rein in the COVID-19 pandemic and revitalise the economy, which fell into recession last February. GDP declined 3.5% for the year, the biggest drop since 1946. But the economy has been gradually improving since then, with first quarter growth coming in at an annualised rate of 6.4%. So has Joe Biden lived up to his promises so far? Fred Katayama assesses the president's first 100 days.
When Joseph Biden took office on January 20th, the U.S. was a country divided, struggling to control a serious virus outbreak and mired in a deep recession. More than 400,000 Americans were dead from COVID-19 and 10 million were unemployed.
Tonight, I come to talk about crisis and opportunity, about rebuilding the nation, revitalizing our democracy, and winning the future for America.
The new president campaigned on promises to beat the pandemic, revive the economy, and tackle climate change. Within hours of his inauguration, he set in motion plans for the U.S. to rejoin the World Health Organization and the Paris Climate Agreement, and established a White House COVID-19 response team. Biden promised to vaccinate 100 million Americans by his 100th day in office. He then doubled that goal to 200 million shots in 100 days and hit the target a week early.
Well, I think overall his first 100 days have been quite promising and very encouraging from the fact that we continue to see a very strong vaccine rollout, and we have a lot of stimulus being pumped into the economy to help those that need it the most.
1 year to the day after the WHO declared COVID-19 a pandemic, Biden signed into law a $1.9 trillion economic stimulus package. He then unveiled a $2.3 trillion infrastructure plan that would expand broadband and advance clean energy projects. Next up, a third massive spending bill, the American Family Plan, which would invest in childcare, paid family leave, and education by increasing income and capital gains taxes on top earners.
I think it's more about, this notion that if you work hard, play by the rules, have a job, that you ought to be able to, have a middle-class lifestyle and get ahead. And too many people are falling behind.
The economy is already showing some signs of improvement. March retail sales surged nearly 10%, and unemployment has fallen to 6% from the pandemic high of 14.8% this time last year.
I think if you voted for Joe Biden, I don't think there's any reason to be particularly upset about the first 100 days at least. I think he's basically lived up to what he's been promising.
Voters seem to agree. According to the latest Pew Research Center poll, 59% of Americans approve of the job Biden is doing. The challenge will be getting his proposals through a divided Congress and maintaining that popularity once the honeymoon period is over. Fred Katayama, TRT World, New York.
Well, let's get more on this now with Christian Lawrence in New York. He's a Senior Cross-Asset Strategist at Rabobank. Good to have you back with us, Christian. Now, there was a lot to digest in Biden's first address to a sitting of the Joint Congress, but let's start with his declaration that America is now ready for takeoff, because the latest GDP numbers would certainly suggest that. Is it onwards and upwards for the US economy from here on in?
Well, I think for the remainder of this year, that's certainly going to be the case. The vaccine rollout, as was just pointed out in that clip, has been incredible, quite frankly. New York, where I'm sitting at the moment, will be fully open as of July 1st. And this, of course, makes a huge, huge impact. When you couple that with the Fed still providing loose monetary policy and clearly more in the way of fiscal relief coming from the government, we have this perfect concoction for activity to pick up notably this year. Of course, the question is, how do things perform much further down the line? But for the coming months, I think it certainly is onwards and upwards for the US economy.
Joe Biden also used this address to really push his ambitious spending plans. Let's just take a look at what's being proposed or what has already been enacted. And The first thing that he passed was a $1.9 trillion fiscal stimulus in March. He then turned his support to focus on winning support for a $2.3 trillion infrastructure spending bill, as well as a $1.8 trillion expansion of the social safety net. These are huge sums that Joe Biden has described as a once-in-a-generation investment in America itself. Is he right? Is there only an upside to these ambitious spending proposals?
Well, the US is certainly in desperate need of infrastructure spending. So I think both sides agree to that, the Republicans and the Democrats. It's just what form it takes and how it's funded. But certainly that's a positive. And as with the latest plan from Biden, well, one thing we do know about all recessions is that it hits the lower income groups the hardest. And that has been particularly true for the recession we saw last year and for the COVID crisis in general. Although when we look on aggregate, household balance sheets are in good shape, lower income households have been struggling. So the idea of providing more support to them going forward, I certainly think makes sense. And the US is in more of a privileged position in that it can see the debt increase without it necessarily having the same ramifications it would for non-reserve currency countries.
And as well as raising debt, he also wants to hike taxes, which is, I guess, the more controversial aspect to these spending plans. He wants to raise the top income tax as well as capital gains tax. He wants to boost taxes on companies, and he also wants to expand the Internal Revenue Service so that they essentially collect more tax from the wealthy. Republicans argue, of course, that these tax hikes would only hurt the US economy. Is there any truth to that?
It's very difficult when we come to these sorts of tax discussions because, of course, the very wealthy should be paying more in the way of tax. And of course, some of the mega corporations in the US should be paying more in tax. But making that actually happen can prove difficult. And the idea that the very wealthy may relocate elsewhere is certainly a real risk. Quite what this is going to take when it's finally agreed upon, that remains to be seen. But the idea of taxing some of the mega wealthy, I think most people can agree on. It's just how it's structured and how realistic it is to enforce.
Okay, Christian Lawrence from Rabobank. We'll have to leave it there, but a pleasure to have you on as always. Thank you for that.